2023 was the first time that two Australians have driven in Formula 1 at the same time in a decade. While Daniel Ricciardo and Oscar Piastri might be from the same country, they are going in very different directions in their careers. So let's take a look at Oscar Piastri's continued rise and the struggles of Daniel Ricciardo. The rise of Oscar Piastri. The future of Australian Formula 1 looks in safe hands with McLaren youngster Oscar Piastri. Born in Melbourne, Oscar's father Chris had a massive passion for motorsport, which led to Oscar starting his karting career at just 10 years old. Having gone professional and competed in various races around Australia, the Piastri family knew that to better their son's chances of reaching the top level of motorsport, they needed to leave the country. Thanks in part to the investment from his father, Piastri began competing in Formula 4, taking 2 podiums in his first season. While he didn't notch up any wins during his time in Formula 4, Piastri still showed incredible pace for a kid so young. He really announced himself to the motoring world in 2020, having signed for Prema Racing in Formula 3. The Aussie youngster won his very first race in F3, going on to collect the title, ahead of future F1 driver Logan Sargent, and prospects Theo Pucheri, Enzo Fittipaldi, and Liam Lawson. At the start of the 2020 season, Piastri had a big help arrive in his career in the form of former F1 driver Mark Webber. Webber is one of the best drivers to never win a world title, having accumulated 9 wins and 42 podiums across a brilliant career in the sport. There is no doubt this was a great move for Piastri. In 2021, he was signed with Prema Racing in F2, and it was a brilliant season. In a field with some talented drivers, Piastri dominated the later parts of the season to win his 3rd title in a row, and announce himself as arguably the most exciting prospect in F1. Despite that, he did not get a drive straight away, but Piastri was given the McLaren seat vacated by Daniel Ricciardo in 2023, and he's not looked back since. While many people expected Oscar to take a few years to settle into the sport and compete with his teammate Lando Norris, Oscar has been brilliant. While he finished in the points just twice in his first 9 races, Oscar benefited massively from his team picking up the pace in the second half of the season. In his rookie season, Piastri notched a pair of podiums and finished ahead of experienced F1 drivers. He has started this season in impressive form. Piastri finished 4th in Saudi Arabia, comfortably faster than his teammate for most of the weekend. Lando is one of the best drivers in the sport, so for the 22-year-old to already be competing with Norris is highly impressive. Oscar Piastri entered the sport as one of the most highly touted prospects in a number of years. That comes with a lot of pressure, particularly when you have the chance to make your debut for one of the best teams in the history of the sport. There is no doubt that Oscar is moving in the right direction. He is one of the best young drivers in the sport and already in a team that can produce a podium-contending car. His stock only seems to be rising, which can't be seen as quite the same for Daniel Ricciardo. Daniel Ricciardo's struggles. Danny Ric has been one of the most talked about drivers in the sport over the last few years, and not just for his performance in Drive to Survive. The 8-time race winner struggled massively in his 2 years with McLaren despite a win in Italy. It seemed like Danny made the wrong choice in 2018 when he chose to leave Red Bull for Renault. Ricciardo was massively outperformed by Lando Norris in his 2 seasons with McLaren, and it looked like his career in the sport could have been over. But it was his old team Red Bull that gave Ricciardo an opportunity to prove that he could still succeed in F1. After spending the first half of 2023 as the team's 3rd driver, he got another opportunity when junior team AlphaTauri released Nick De Vries midway through the season. Ricciardo jumped into the AlphaTauri car and had the chance to show off to some prospective teams. The problem for the Aussie is that he jumped into a very slow car and was outperformed solidly by his new teammate. He would, however, miss 5 races due to a broken bone in his hand caused by a crash at the Dutch Grand Prix. Danny did have a great performance in Mexico towards the end of the season, qualifying in 4th before going on to finish 7th. It dragged AlphaTauri off the bottom of the constructor standings. While he may have been outperformed by Yuki Tsunoda for much of the second half of the season, Ricciardo still earned a seat with the newly named RB team for 2024. He has, however, once again struggled this season, particularly compared to his teammates. The expectations were pretty high for RB heading into the season due to their relationship with sister team Red Bull growing. Having taken even more parts from the reigning champions this year, RB were hoping to compete at the top of the midfield. That has not exactly been the case so far, despite putting in some impressive performances in testing and topping FP1 in Bahrain. Ricciardo finished in 13th in Bahrain and finished a lowly 16th in Saudi Arabia. That poor finish in Jeddah was partly down to a slow pit stop for Ricciardo, but was also down to a spin a couple of laps before the checkered flag. After the race, Ricciardo was clear that the team are struggling, but they remain optimistic. The former Red Bull driver said, "Honestly, we found a few things over the course of the weekend, but we're heading into the race always upbeat and optimistic that maybe something happens." It sounds like the VC-ARB 01 needs some work before RB can truly compete with the midfield teams. The issue for Danny Ric is that he doesn't have a lot of time. While he's one of the most loved and prominent names in Formula 1, Danny Ric has not quite lived up to the potential he had when he entered the sport. Ricciardo's future in F1. In his first season with Red Bull, Ricciardo outperformed Sebastian Vettel, who was coming off of 4 straight world titles. It was an incredible performance, but Ricciardo has not been in title contention since. At 34 years old, he should still have a few years left in his prime. But Danny Ric has struggled massively in the last few seasons. Being outperformed by Lando Norris is not awful, but Ricciardo was nowhere near his teammates when he was with McLaren. With AlphaTauri, it hasn't been much better. Ricciardo spoke extensively about his desire to get back into a top seat. In fact, he said that he would only go to a midfield team like RB if it led to him getting back into a top seat. Well, at the moment, that doesn't look promising. While there are going to be some seats available in 2025, Ricciardo is certainly not the favourite to claim one of them. Other drivers like Fernando Alonso, Alex Albon and Ollie Behrman seem to be in a better position. There are even more reasons for top teams to look at Ricciardo's teammate Yuki Tsunoda than Danny himself. With Ricciardo struggling, there are even calls for RB to make a similar move to the one they did last year. Liam Lawson looked good when he sat in for Ricciardo after his broken hand in 2023. If this poor form continues, maybe RB need to make a shock move like they did last year. Australian Grand Prix. As we approach the Australian Grand Prix, there's going to be a lot of talk about the 2 homegrown drivers that will be on the grid. They are both at very different points in their careers. For Piastri, this race would be a great chance for him to become the first Australian driver on the podium at their home event since the race joined the sport. On a track that Daniel Ricciardo has never performed brilliantly on, he needs a good performance to kickstart his season. If the RB driver cannot put together a good showing at his home race, then more questions about his future in the sport will be asked. But what do you think about the 2 Aussie drivers heading into their home race? Put your thoughts in the comments down below, and while you're down there, hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.